Hello everyone, my name is Hisham and today we're going to talk about events in React and more specifically mouse events. Now you can check out the full documentation about events in the MDN docs. As you can see, there are many types of events such as like animation, composition, clipboard, data fetching, CSS transitions, but what we're going to focus on are going to be mouse events. Now, most of the time you're gonna be working with mouse events. That's the most common type of event that you're probably gonna be working on in general. And the most common one is clicked, because most of the time you're just gonna wanna react to user clicks on your website. There are many other types of events, but you're gonna be using these much less than the clicked event. Now, if we go to our React code, I made some changes from our last video. So now I'm going to talk about the onClick event in React. And the way you call this event is very simple. You just type on click, which is like in camel case, and you just pass it just like JavaScript, right? And we're going to console log the word event. So if we go to the browser and we click, okay, it's like event is logged, but it's not logged when I click on the button. It's actually logged whenever the page loads, so it doesn't wait for the onClick to happen. And the reason for that is because onClick expects a function. And what we're doing here is actually, as soon as this line is reached, the browser will immediately execute this expression, and it's not going to wait for onClick to happen, because onClick expects a function. And the way to fix this is to actually pass an anonymous function for now. Now, this will actually fix it, because now we're actually passing a function to onClick. And if we go back and we click, you can see events being logged. And it actually waits for us to click in order to log the word event. Actually, by default, you get the event object. So the browser passes the event object to the onClick function. And if you hover over it, it says react.mouseEvent. So it's not a native browser event because React has an abstraction on top of events. And if you want to learn more about that, you can actually go to the React event object in the documentation, and it will talk about synthetic events and the way React handles events in general. So now we're gonna actually log the event itself. And if we go back to the browser and click button, as you can see, we got the event, the synthetic event, which is exactly what the documentation says. And this actually has a bunch of properties, and we have a property called type, and it's click. So this is how we know it's a click event. And if you want access to the native event, like the one by the browser, you can just check this property called native event, and you will actually have access to the original event that's actually emitted by the browser. Now, usually you wouldn't be passing an inline function like this. You would actually define your code somewhere inside of an external function, and you would pass the function here. So because you want to have reusable code. So in that case, we can uncomment our onClick handler here. And I'm going to use Control-KU to uncomment. And as you can see, we have an onClick handler that takes the event and logs it. And in order to simplify our code, we can just call, instead of console.log, we can just pass onClick handler. And now this is like the same behavior, nothing changed. We just made the code more reusable because now we can reuse this function on all our other events. And actually, to simplify it even more, we can actually get rid of the anonymous function. And actually, instead of invoking the function, we can just pass the function itself. Because by default, the function gets the event object. So this is the exact same behavior as before, but right now we actually simplified the code even more. But there are use cases where you actually need to use like an anonymous function where you have multiple arguments. So this won't always be convenient. Now, and if we go back to the browser, nothing has changed. When I click the button, the synthetic event is called. And that's the onClick event. Now, our next event is actually the onMouseOver event. Now, this event is called whenever the mouse goes on top of the element. So you can think of it as a hover event. So I'm going to clear the logs, and as soon as the mouse goes on top of the button, it's called. I'm going to go away and go on top of it again, and it's logged. Our next event is the onMouseOut event. And this is pretty much whenever the mouse leaves the element. So I'm going to clear the logs, and I'm going to hover over it. Nothing happens. But when I leave the element, that's when it's called. So yeah, this is whenever the mouse leaves the element. Our next event is the onMouseMove, which is actually a pretty cool event because it's called whenever the mouse moves inside of the element. And as you can see, each time I move it, it's called, and it's called a lot of times. Like you can see that it's called like over 1,000 times. And you should actually be careful with this event because if you don't handle it correctly, you can cause some very bad performance problems. As you can see, like from the fact that we just hovered over it for a couple of seconds, it's fired up over 2,000 times. Now our next event is the onMouseDown event, which is called as soon as I click the element. And it doesn't actually wait for us to release the click. So if I click the element, you can see that it was fired, but I still haven't released it. So my finger is still pressing the mouse. But when I release, so nothing happens because the event has already fired. Now, unlike the onClick event, so I'm gonna, as soon as I click, this is fired. Whereas the onClick event waits for me to release the click itself. Now our next event is the onMouseUp event. Now the onMouseUp event may seem pretty similar to the onClick event because I'm gonna click and I'm gonna release and mouse up is called, right? Now you may be a bit confused because this seems to behave the same way as the onClick event, but there is actually a very important difference. Now the mouse up event doesn't require you to actually click on the element before you release. So you can click anywhere else. For example, I'm gonna click on Code with Hisham and I'm gonna continue to hold it, and then I'm gonna release it when I hover over the button. So that's when onMouseUp is called. Whereas the onClick event actually requires you to actually click on the element in order to register the onClick event. So as you can see, I can't do it. So when I click here and I release, it doesn't work because the onClick event requires that you actually click on the element itself that you're gonna release from. So that's the biggest difference between onMouseUp and onClick, because at first they may seem pretty similar. And our next event is onDoubleClick, which doesn't require that much explanation. It fires as soon as you double click the button. So I'm gonna click once. As you can see, it doesn't happen. I'm gonna click again, but it's only called when you double click very, very quickly. So I'm gonna double click now, and now you can see that it's called. And you can see that this is like pretty powerful. You have access to so many different types of events, and we've only talked about like very few of them. There's a whole bunch more that you can use to pretty much like do anything that you want that reacts to the user interactions. And yeah, so these are mouse events in React. Now in my next video, I'm gonna talk about useState, which is a React hook that allows you to manage state in React. So yeah, see you in my next video.